The Early Mission at Sault Ste Marie by Abel Bingham. Read by Frank Blissett. Mission House, Sault Ste Marie, October 27th, 1852. Mrs. E A Sheldon, respected sister. It is sometimes said, better late than never. But I fear it will not prove so in this case. I found it more difficult to comply with the request you made to me when here in the summer than I anticipated, but will endeavor to give you a few brief particulars now. In the summer of 1828, I received an appointment from that missionary organization now known by the name of American Baptist Missionary Union as a missionary to this place, and in a few weeks, after making arrangements to leave my family among friends in the state of New York, I commenced my journey up these lakes and landed at this place on the 10th of October, having been some 4 or 5 weeks in reaching here from Buffalo. On arriving here, I found 4 companies of infantry in the garrison at this place, an Indian agency with an agent, a sub-agent, interpreter, blacksmith, etc., a custom office, 5 or 6 trading establishments, and a small population containing a few Americans, a few French, some Indians, and some mixed bloods. And for the comfort and enjoyment of this people, they had 2 billiard rooms, almost as many card tables as there were cabins in the place, and somewhere from 11 to 15,000 gallons of ardent spirits. There was indeed a congregational minister here, the Reverend Alvin Coe, who had been here a few months on a domestic mission, laboring faithfully for their good. But the great enemy of Christ and his people had evidently succeeded in raising a prejudice against him, so that he was not at that time allowed to preach to the garrison people. In 2 or 3 weeks after my arrival, there was a change of the troops, and those 4 companies left, and 2 companies from another regiment were sent to supply their place. A number of the officers who left had families, but there were only 3 officers who came with the new command, and they were all single men. Brother Coe also left, and some other individuals, which seriously reduced our circle of society for the winter, and I might say for many years. In a few days after my arrival, I had a room prepared and opened a school, and within 3 days I had between 50 and 60 scholars. Probably 2/3 or 3/4 of them were in the alphabet. I attached a large sheet containing the alphabet to the side of my room, formed the small scholars into classes, and placed a monitor over them, whose business it was, through the day, to march those classes, one after another, to the card and teach them, the whole class speaking at once. In a few weeks we had them all nicely through their alphabet. Those who were large enough to write I taught myself, and at the same time taught it in writing on slates, and then had them write their spelling lessons instead of studying them in the usual way. My religious services were divided between the white people and Indians. The morning service was for the white population, and the afternoon, by an interpreter, for the Indians. When I commenced preaching to the Indians, I was told by some who thought themselves wise that I was beginning at the wrong end of my work, that it was useless and abstruse to think of preaching the obtuse doctrines of Christianity to them until they were civilized and educated. but the Lord showed our skeptics before the opening of the spring that they were not as wise as they imagined themselves to be, for there were 2 or 3 hopeful conversions took place among the natives during the winter. And one was a woman 50 or 60 years of age, whose name was Oshashawa-Bikogwa, who had long been passionately addicted to habits of intemperance. This she mentioned at the time she related to me what the Lord had done for her, and said she, "Although at first it seemed like cutting my heartstrings, I determined to break it off." Her habits had been such that I felt afraid to receive her to membership, and did not for about a year and a half. But after she was received, she filled her place so faithfully in the Church of God for 19 years that, during the whole time of her membership, there was never a single allegation brought against her. Although she was a woman of ordinary talents, she shone bright as a Christian, and her last days were evidently much the brightest, for her faith strengthened and the light brightened as she drew near the end of her journey. Men who at times could make sport of religion have been constrained to take knowledge of her, that she had been with Jesus. I found the Indians uniformly in a very dark and ignorant state, attached to their Metawins, or medicine religion, and practicing a kind of sorcery by which their jugglers exerted much influence over their adherents. I also found there was considerable competition and strife among them for eminence in their Metawin, and that their ambition in that heathen science occasionally led them to destroy one another with poison. Their ideas of religion were so confounded with their medical system that they were inseparable, and their jugglers were their doctors. I have frequently seen them practicing, in former days, their heathenish ceremonies over the sick, and wondered that they did not immediately kill them and choke themselves to death with the large hollow bones they appeared to eject from their stomachs. They never administered medicine to the sick unaccompanied by their heathenish ceremonies. They appeared to consider the latter as essential as the former. Many years ago, one of our heathen women was sick and came to our place, probably for medical aid. I got the doctor to go and see her, and on examining her he decided that she had a spinal complaint, and said it would require pretty severe treatment, and concluded she would not submit to it long enough to cure her, and declined doing anything for her. They camped near the mission house and remained some weeks. I frequently called into their lodge and read portions of the translation to them and prayed with them. She found we had cupping instruments, and a few times sent for me to go over and cup her, which I did. But she returned up the lake without any manifest improvement in her health. The next spring I was up there and in at their lodge, and addressing them on the subject of religion. She was then indeed measurably recovered. But she spoke up with much spirit, saying, "If I am a well woman, it was this medicine religion that cured me. When I was down at your place, both you and the doctor tried your religion upon me, and it did me no good. If I am a well woman, it is this medicine religion that has cured me." On my first acquaintance with these Indians, I found them believing in a great spirit, whom they called Kitchimunado, and frequently they spoke it Geshamunado, the merciful spirit. They also believed that there was an evil spirit who was very powerful, whom they called Muchimunado. They believed in the immortality of the soul, and that there would be a distinction made between good men and bad after death. But in relation to the resurrection of the body, and most of the other doctrines of the Christian religion, they were dark as night, and would tell you they did not know when inquired of concerning them. They were always ready to admit that the white man's religion was good, and that he received it from the Great Spirit, and that he designed it on purpose for them. But they claimed that they also received theirs from the Great Spirit, and that he designed it especially for the Indians, and that it was as good for the Indians as the Christian religion was for the white man. The best method I ever found to convince them to the contrary by way of argument was to compare the two systems. This I have sometimes done, and never failed of obtaining an acknowledgment that the Christian religion appeared vastly superior to theirs. I have taken this method with a few of their most shrewd, knowing men who had made the greatest advancement in their medicine religion. One of them admitted that their religion, when thus compared, looked like the religion of the devil, and further remarked that all their young men carried poison with them to poison others with. But, said he, I see nothing in your religion designed to injure anyone. It all appears to be designed for their good. Another admitted that we had much more evidence that our religion came from the great and merciful Spirit than they had that theirs did. I then said to him, If ours comes from God, yours could not, for they are too opposite to each other to admit the belief that they both came from the same holy being. And on this we parted, after he had promised that he would come and listen to the gospel. When I commenced my labors here, intemperance was a vice exceedingly common and prevalent among almost all classes, and the general state of things, even the manner of transacting government business, was such as tended to cherish, strengthen, and perpetuate it. In the garrison, the commissary was dealing out a gill of whiskey a day to the enlisted men, and they were allowed to purchase another gill at the sutler's store, and few, if any, failed of taking their full allowance, for it seemed to be viewed as unmanly for anyone to fail in that particular. Hence, anyone can easily judge what the general state of things must be with them. The Indian agent also, on certain occasions, used to deal out whiskey to them, and when an Indian began to drink, he must have a thorough time of it before he could go to business again, and there was nothing to hinder him from getting what he pleased, for our place was flooded with it, and a white fish would buy enough to keep him drunk all day. From what I have seen and heard from their own lips, I am led to believe that there was not an Indian among them who did not, at least occasionally, get drunk. It has seemed to me that they might at that time, in truth, most emphatically be called a nation of drunkards. The state of things was exceedingly discouraging, and it was manifest that, unless something could be done to check so free and general a use of intoxicating liquor in the place, no reasonable hope could be cherished of any great success attending the most faithful missionary labors. After lamenting the sad state of things and praying over the subject a short time, The idea was suggested to my mind of making an effort to get up a Temperance Society. The question was, who would encourage it? Some of my warmest friends were in such business it would oppose their interest, and what could be expected from those who felt no interest in the mission? However, the suggestion appeared to be from the Lord, and the effort must be made. It was at an early day of the temperance reform, and there was not a person at the place who had ever belonged to a temperance society or attended a temperance meeting. The proposition was first made to the sutler in the garrison, John Hulbert, Esquire, late of your city, who was at that time selling about 80 gills of whiskey a day to the men. He clearly saw its bearing on the interest of the store, but with the magnanimity of a Christian, he resolved cheerfully to sacrifice that, and at once pledged himself in favor of the enterprise, and in May, 1830, we organized the St. Mary's Temperance Society, having the commanding officer of Fort Brady, the second in command, the doctor, and sutler for the first 4 signers of the Constitution and pledge. And in a few days we had the signature of 45 men of the command. At first the citizens of the place generally stood aloof from it, but in 2 years we got all the traders in the place into it, and under a pledge not to deal in ardent spirits. Our executive committee, on examination, found that from 11,000 to 15,000 gallons of ardent spirits had been brought to the place yearly for 4 years last past, and they were enabled to report not a gallon of ardent spirits to be sold in the place. With kindest regards, your friend and brother, A. Bingham. That was The Early Mission at Sault Ste. Marie by Abel Bingham. Read by Frank Blissett.